Radio Health Journal talks about distracted drivers after this.
Remember the days when we used to make macaroni art for Mom or regift items found around the house for Mother's Day? This year, show Mom how much you appreciate her and all that she does with flowers from Pro Flowers. Pro Flowers is offering listeners 100 blooms with a free glass vase for just $19.99. Or make her day extra special and upgrade to a premium vase and add chocolates for just $9.99 more. Go to proflowers.com today and use my code RHJ. Their easy-to-use website makes buying a beautiful gift for Mom simple and quick. Pro Flowers are guaranteed to be fresh and beautiful for at least 7 days. You just choose the delivery date you want, and it's guaranteed. Here is the only way to get 100 blooms with a free glass vase for just $19.99. Visit proflowers.com. Click on the blue microphone in the top right corner and type in RHJ. That's proflowers.com. Click on the microphone and type in RHJ. Order today. This offer expires Friday at midnight.
In much of America, it's really hard to get along without a car. Few cities have truly extensive mass transit, and when you get to the suburbs and beyond, a car is almost essential. No wonder teenagers think of a driver's license as a ticket to freedom. But freedom comes with a price. Inexperience and brain physiology combine to make teenagers the most dangerous drivers on the road.
Car crashes remain the leading cause of death for teenagers in this country. For example, in 2013, the last year that we have national statistics available, teen drivers accounted for 1 million crashes, resulting in 380,000 injuries and almost 3,000 deaths.
That's Peter Kissinger, President and CEO of the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety.
And it's important to recognize also that teen drivers impact more than themselves when they're unfortunate to get in a crash. I mean, for every teen driver that dies, there's an additional passenger typically in the car that dies, and one other person in another car or a pedestrian. So this is something that not only affects teens and families that have teen drivers, but it affects every one of us that use the road.
That's why over the last 20 years, states have ramped up graduated driver's license requirements on 16 and 17-year-olds. Those rules typically demand an adult be sitting next to a new driver on the road for hours on end as they gain experience. There are more limitations once teens are driving on their own. And Dr. Kelly Browning, Executive Director of Impact Teen Drivers, says those rules have worked.
All 50 states in the U.S. have adopted graduated driver's licensing laws. The challenge is every state has a bit of a different structure in their law, but the idea behind them is that you have a 3-stage process, a learner's permit, and then some type of intermediate licensure stage, and then a full licensure. And the idea there is to reduce the high-risk situations such as nighttime driving and passengers in the car, which we know are a huge distraction for young people, while giving your child the opportunity to gain needed experience. So reducing the high-risk situations while they gain experience. And it's really critical that parents and young people choose to follow those graduated driver's licensing laws because we know that they have reduced teen driving fatalities across the U.S. by 40 to 60%.
Graduated licensing is far and away the single most effective thing we have ever done, probably in traffic safety, but certainly with respect to teen drivers.
Dr. Robert Foss is director of the Center for the Study of Young Drivers at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
There must be 4 or 5 dozen studies out there now that show that when a state goes or when states move to grad licensing, their younger teen driver crashes went down and 16-year-old driver crashes went down pretty dramatically in most states, and 17-year-old driver crashes went down more in some states, less in others. It depends on how the particular GDL system was structured. If you have a really good GDL system, then it reduces 17-year-old driver crashes as well. So it's been a massive success.
That's certainly a good thing. But Foss says many experts had hoped for more.
One of the things that we really thought it would do is actually make for better drivers when they first got out on the road on their own, as opposed to riding around with mom or dad in the car. And it appears to have done that, but not nearly as much so as we really thought it would. Looks like the bulk of the benefits of GDL come from the fact that when teens start driving now for their first 6, 9, 12 months, they're driving basically with mom or dad.
So it may be that GDLs cut the teen driving death rate by keeping them off the road, not by making them better drivers. Teens still make plenty of mistakes. Biology makes some of them almost inevitable.
Well, it turns out that your brain doesn't get fully developed until you're probably in your mid-20s, maybe 25, 26. And unfortunately, that portion of your brain that develops the slowest is the part that's sort of your executive function. And among other things, it's the part that allows one to assess risk. So whereas, for example, an experienced driver driving down a residential street and sees up above maybe a little bit of a hill, sees some kids playing with a ball, experienced drivers would intuitively know to be worried about, to keep looking there to make sure, because they would anticipate the possibility of the ball rolling in the street and a young kid following the ball. Unfortunately, teen brains are not wired to automatically understand that. So they just really don't do a good job of assessing potential risks, nor managing, if you will, with those risks.
A new study by the AAA Foundation has a lot to say about the mistakes young drivers make. Researchers got access to nearly 1,700 videos of teenage drivers taken by dashboard-mounted cameras in the seconds before a crash. Kissinger says they showed teen drivers who were distracted a great deal of the time.
In almost 60% of the case, 58% of the case, the teen driver was distracted in one way or another. So basically, they were not engaged in the activity of paying attention while they were driving. The two biggest causes we found, number one, were passengers in the vehicle, which occurred in about 15% of the cases. And secondarily, cell phones, which we saw in about 12% of the cases. And both of those factors substantially increase the risk of those teenagers being in a crash.
It's not a sure thing that the distracted driving shown was always the cause of the crash, although you can't avoid that conclusion some of the time.
In slightly over 50% of the cases, when a teenager was actually using a cell phone, they actually ran into the vehicle in front of them without braking or steering. So in other words, the first time they noticed that they actually were in trouble is when the collision occurred. Now, most likely, those teens were experiencing a real phenomenon called inattention blindness. And that is a situation where your brain can be so focused on a task at hand, which can either be visual or mental. You can be so focused on that task at hand that you literally cannot see something directly in front of you. It's almost like driving blind.
And it's not just texting that gets teens in trouble driving. It can be just as dangerous to pick up something that's fallen on the floor, put on makeup, or get into an animated conversation with a passenger. Anything that takes the driver's eyes off the road.
There's a long-standing rule of thumb in the traffic safety world, which is you should not take your eyes off the road for longer than 2 seconds. Because we know that if you do, if eyes off the road goes longer than 2 seconds, that doubles the chance of you being in a crash. Because the teen brain has not fully developed, and they haven't gained the requisite experience to understand and manage risk while they're driving, teenagers don't appreciate that they cannot continue to look with their eyes off the road. What we found in our study, as a terrible example, is that when the teen was manipulating the phone, not just making a call, but either dialing or texting, the average eyes off the road was 4.1 seconds. That's twice the benchmark that we usually use that we know doubles the chance of being in a crash.
Kissinger says the teen brain may even confuse what's most important when making a choice between driving and texting.
From our surveys, for example, when we talk about distracted driving, unfortunately, many teens will tell us, hey, look, it's not that the cell phone is distracting my driving. It's that the car is actually distracting my ability to communicate with my friend.
However, surveys show that the message may be starting to sink in, that texting while driving is dangerous. Dr. David Hurwitz is Assistant Professor of Transportation Engineering at Oregon State University.
Teens had a comparatively high recognition that activities associated with mobile devices that they bring into their vehicle can constitute distractions if they interact with them while they're driving. So things like talking on a cell phone or texting while driving, comparatively, they recognize those as distractions.
Staring at a phone trying to dial a number or type a message or read a message while you're driving is just insanely dangerous. And teenagers are not that stupid. They know that this is risky, and we've been seeing this, and other research have been seeing this for years, that teenagers go through the same kind of thought processes that adults do about using phones. And sometimes they slip up and do it anyway, just like adults do.
So how do we get the message through to teenagers? Dr. Kelly Browning of Impact Teen Drivers says her group has been successful.
For years, we spent a lot of time, energy, and resources on trying to scare teens into wanting to do the right thing. 30-plus years of psychological literature has shown that trying to scare young people into doing the right thing is not the answer. So really helping them be empowered to make those good decisions by recognizing it can be that moment of inattention, that very simple distraction, things that we do every single day that are perfectly acceptable to do until you choose to do them behind the wheel where they become lethal.
Hurwitz's study shows that interactive training has much more influence on teens than passive learning, such as a lecture.
We'd bring a couple of kids up to the front of the classroom, and they would write on a chalkboard or a whiteboard. They would transcribe numbers from 100 to 0 in 5 interval units, and one student would do it without distraction, and a second student would be on a cell phone having a conversation with a researcher. And we would watch, inevitably, the student engaged in a conversation, taking 2 or 3 or 4 times as long to complete this very simple task. Things like that.
However, Browning says the biggest influence may be a teen's parents. Not in what parents say, but how they've been driving for years before the teen ever takes the wheel.
As a parent, you're the number one role model of your teen's driving attitudes and behaviors. Meaning if you're slugging back the latte, talking on the phone, and driving with your knee, you can't wonder why your kids are going to do the same thing, but probably even at a higher level. So it's really important that parents recognize they're the role model and that they are also responsible as a gatekeeper to controlling the keys and making sure their child's ready to get behind the wheel of a vehicle.
It should probably be no surprise that teen drivers are a lot like the rest of us. Browning says 98% of people agree that texting is dangerous while driving, but 75% of people do it anyway. We multitask at all kinds of things while we drive. 27% of teens admit they've even changed clothes or shoes while they're driving. Just about everyone takes safe driving for granted.
2/3 of American drivers feel they were born in Lake Wobegon, so they were above average drivers. And I think they mistakenly believe that they have sufficient control that they can always brake or steer out of any situation that develops. And unfortunately, that's not the case. Now, the good news is that, let's face it, driving crashes are still rather rare. But the downside of that is we often get into bad habits. Certainly no one believes that every time you text while you drive, you're going to have a crash. But what does happen is the more you do that, you build up a bad habit, and then, God forbid, when the statistics run against you, you end up with a tragedy in your hands.
You can find out more about all of our guests through links on our website, radiohealthjournal.net. You can always find our shows on iTunes and Stitcher. I'm Reed Pence.
Annually, nearly 610,000 Americans with acute coronary syndrome undergo a procedure to open a blocked heart artery. Many receive a stent and are prescribed an oral antiplatelet or OAP medication for 1 year. Taken with aspirin, an OAP reduces the risk of a recurrent heart event and blood clots from forming in the stent. However, patients might stop taking their OAP because they don't understand its role or importance, according to Lola Koch from the Preventive Cardiovascular Nurses Association, or PCNA.
Studies have shown stopping OAPs early is associated with a greater risk for another heart event or death. PCNA, the Society for Cardiovascular Angiography and Interventions, and Mended Hearts, with support from Daiichi Sankyo Incorporated and Eli Lilly and Company, have launched After the Stent, Follow Your Action Plan, to help healthcare professionals gain insights into why patients stop taking their OAP medication so they can better educate their patients on the importance of OAP adherence.
For more information on OAPs, visit pcna.net or secondscount.org.
The results are in. For the treatment of nasal allergy symptoms, nothing is more effective than Nasacort. Nasacort Allergy 24-Hour is prescription-strength medicine that's scent and alcohol-free with no harsh taste. It's non-addictive and provides 24-hour relief of the worst nasal allergy symptoms, including congestion, with no prescription needed. And in a recent clinical study with Nasacort going nose-to-nose with Flonase, more people prefer Nasacort. For more information, visit nasacort.com. Nasacort. Use as directed.